Alright, in this video we're going to use Unity to create a 2D game. We're going to import the sprites and put them in the scene and code the character with Playmaker to create movement in the game. This is a 2D platformer style movement. So if I press play, for example, we can see we have the character in idle position where he's just standing and breathing, and as you press left and right, he walks across the screen. And there's already gravity built into it, so that's what we're going to cover in this video. So first thing to start off with, let's make a new scene. So I'll start with a new project. New scene will just make a new scene within the project, but new project will start the settings all over again for the video. And we're going to set this as a 2D default, and here's where the project gets created. You can set that to a different location if you want. I'll put it on I guess I'll make it on the desktop. Make a new folder called video demo. Okay. And then we'll press create. And don't save. Alright, so we have a brand new scene in Unity now. Here we can see our how the window workspace works. We have a scene mode right here, which is what we're seeing the scene, the same as this one. An animator tab, an animation, I'll pull those up later. The game view is what we're seeing in the game. And if we press play at the moment, it should light up blue, and you have a blue screen because there's nothing existing in the world at the moment. So that's basically how it works. So we're going to start adding some content. Over here is the inspector tab, which shows all of our settings as we go through creating things. And then over here we have a hierarchy tab, which means everything that's currently in the scene. And project is the folder that contains everything that's used in the entire project. So you can kind of think of hierarchy as like what's in the scene at the moment, what's on the screen, whereas project is everything that you may not be using at the moment but is contained in one big project folder. Alright, so those are the different settings, and you can move these tabs around. You can take like the project tab and pop it off and put it somewhere else and rearrange it wherever you want. So if your screen looks different, you can rearrange things, and the same with this, you can pull things around and move the screens around. So at the moment, this is how I have it organized. Alright, so the first thing we need to do is we need to add a couple assets or components to the scene. Unity by default has a lot of, it scripts with like syntax, typing it all out using mono development, but we're going to use Playmaker. It's a visual scripting. It makes it a bit easier to use. So if I pull up the Playmaker website, you can see that this is a third-party attachment to Unity. It allows you to visually script the code so you can say what happens on what event, and it gets the same result as typing line-by-line code. But it's for an artist who's not used to code, it's a little bit easier to understand. So Unity is free. You can go to the Unity website and download that. This link should pop out to the Unity website, so unity3d.com, and you can download the newest version. Currently we're at 4.6, 5.0 is coming out pretty soon. If I switch over to here, Playmaker, however, is not free. But at the moment it's 50% off. I think it usually is 50% off, so you can buy it either on the Unity Asset Store or you can buy it on the Playmaker website right here. If you click on this, it's 50% off, so it's $45. And you can add this to your project. So if you purchase a copy of this, you'd want to drop it in your folder, this one. So in your C drive, program x86, it could just be a different program. It might be program files, but mine's in the x86. Scroll down to Unity, Editor, Standard Packages. I dropped it right here in the Playmaker folder. You don't necessarily have to put it in its own folder, but I put it in a folder to keep it organized. In addition to Playmaker, once you purchase and download that one, we want to use 2 extra add-ons that come with Playmaker, but not necessarily in the original package. So if I go back to the Playmaker website, we go over to Manual, and then there's add-ons right here. So if we click on the add-ons, there's a whole bunch of different add-ons that kind of expand the ability of Playmaker. So we want Mechanism Animator. We click on this one, and we want to download the Playmaker Animator actions. So this gives extra actions to the animator component, which we'll cover later. So you can download that. That one's free, but you still need the original Playmaker file to make use of that. And the next one we want is Unity Physics 2D. This will add the 2D extra stuff to Playmaker. Alright, so once you've downloaded those two, and I've put copies on the school website, the Canvas website for you guys to download, but you can pull up this website if you want. So I put those packages right here. We have the Unity 2D, we have the animator actions, and then the original Playmaker. So once you have those preferably dropped in the the Unity folder, we can start importing them into Unity. So jumping into Unity now, we're going to go to Assets, Import New Asset, or actually Import Package, and we're going to do a custom package. If you already have them sitting in that folder before you load Unity, you'll see them right here. But if you don't have them in that specific folder before Unity loads, they won't be listed here, or they probably won't. So you would just have to go to Custom Package and specify where exactly it is. So this would be the C drive x86, Unity, Editor, Standard Packages, Playmaker, and we want to import Playmaker first. So I'll press Open. And this usually takes a while. It could take anywhere from like a minute to, I guess, 5 minutes, depending on your the speed of your computer. So here it lists all the different things that are going to get imported. You can pick and choose with the check marks which you want to import, but I'm just going to import all of it. It's just easier that way. So I press Import. And now I have to wait another minute or so depending on the speed of your computer. Unity is rather a large, heavy program, so it takes a lot of files and stuff. And so here we go, it runs through. So if you're waiting and sometimes the screen disappears, just keep waiting until it pops up in the project folder. And again, it all depends on the speed of your computer. The school computers tend to go a bit slower than this one. And we're almost there. Fortunately, the other two we import won't take as long as the original Playmaker file. That one's a lot larger. Okay, almost there. And we're good. So now popped in Gizmos, iTween, Photon Unity Networking, and Playmaker. So all these things come with Playmaker. It's Playmaker's way, I think, of adjusting the settings. Anyway, so if you expand out these, you have lots of different things. We have actions in here, lots of different scripts to come with Playmaker. So we're not going to worry about much of that. We're just going to leave those in their own separate folder. Now we're going to go back to Assets, Import Package, and again, if it's not pre in here, you might have to do that, but it should pull up to the last folder I just was at. So Animator Actions, I'll add that in there. Press Open. It's really quick now because it's a lot smaller. Import. And that should run through really quick. And that should pop in Playmaker Animator. So the very last thing, Assets, Import Package. And I'm just going to click this one here instead of going to the folder. So Unity 2D, press Import. Alright, cool. So we've added all the components we're going to need for the moment into Unity. Alright, so now we notice down here that it has an error message down here. It has a red exclamation mark. If I were to press play, it's going to say all compile errors have to be fixed. So remember we had a blue screen earlier? Well, now it won't play anymore. There's something got imported that is causing a glitch in Unity. So we're going to click this little box, and it brings up the console so we can read what the error is. So depending on which version of Unity you have, whether it's 4.3, 4.4, 4.5, I think this one's 4.5, and then 5.0 coming out later. So every version of Unity you get might have issues with Playmaker. So we need to figure out what the issue is and resolve that. At the moment I only have one, but it could be multiple different things. So it says in the Assets folder, which is the main folder, the Playmaker Animator. So we have Playmaker Animator, Actions, right there. get animator is controlled. So we scroll down here to get animator is, let's set get animator is controlled. Alright, so this one is the one having an issue. So is obsolete. So basically we're just going to delete it out of the scene. So right click, delete, and delete that. So now it clears out that. So now if I were to close the console, press play. Try that again, press play. Now it loads up the blue screen, nothing's in the world, so it's blue, but it doesn't have any more errors. So now we're good. Now we can start progressing with our scene. It's usually best to check for errors before you start building anything, because the more things you have, the more places you have to look for things. Alright, so all that work to set up the scene now we can start creating things. I'm going to start making or importing some sprites. So create, I'm going to make a folder to keep things organized. I'm going to make this the sprites folder, and I'm going to pull this out of the Playmaker folder and put it right there. Nope, still. Actually, let's close out that and then drag this to the bottom. Alright, so basically I just rearranged it. I pulled the folder outside of the Playmaker folders and made it its own outside folder. Alright, so when you press import it, if you're highlighted on something, that's where it's going to import to. So if I highlight on this folder, it'll import my sprites into this folder. So I'm going to click on this one so it imports into here. I think if I were to not have anything, it would just pop it outside the folders, but I'm going to import into the sprites. Alright, so again, we're going to go to Assets, Import New Asset. Oh, it's not a package this time. It's not pre-made stuff. It's a new asset. So we import New Asset. And I'm going to look for this on, I think I put it on the desktop. So Demo, Sprites. Open up this. And we have multiple different sprites. I have two different ways we're going to import. So I have the ground plane we're going to use to stand on. We have those standing sprites, so he has about 32, or I guess 23 images of him standing in place, with slight changes to make him look like he's breathing. Or I also have one big sprite sheet which holds about 32 tiny little images going across the screen. Sprite sheets versus just importing them individually, both options work. It's just preference. This makes it a little more contained because you only have one file. This you have a whole bunch of files to kind of keep track of, so it depends what you're aiming for. So I'm going to go with, I guess this one would be the easiest, so I'll go with ground first. So I press import on ground, and it pops the ground plane in. So we're good. If I expand it out, we can see the specific image that it's using. If I click back up here on ground, we have a couple of settings which we shouldn't have to worry about, so I'm going to leave that. The next thing, back to the folder, we're going to go insert, import new asset. And I'm going to grab this one all the way to, actually it's not, I guess you'd have to manually, you can't, yeah, it's not letting me hold shift and grab multiple. So if I were to import this one guy, it would import one at a time, and I'd have to keep importing every one of these, and that could take a little while. Alternatively, what you could do, I'd say right click and delete out this guy. Let's close out sprites. Let's go to the original folder. Actually, that's not it. I think I put this on the desktop, called this video demo. So this is under assets now, which is what all these are, is assets. Sprites is my folder. And you can see that the ground plane, which is the sprite imported, is already in this folder. So I'm going to take this and just grab all of these and drag them between the two windows. So not into Unity, but between the two windows. And this should automatically update inside of Unity now that we've imported these into the sprites folder right here. So I click on sprites, and it's importing all the images at once. So there's that option if you don't want to do one by one. And lastly, we're going to import new asset, and we're going to do left walking. So I press that, import, and it pulls in that one long sprite sheet. Okay, so now to work with these two different ways of doing things. So we take this one right here. This one is set to 1024 by 32. And the reason it's 1024 is because the max size that Unity will let this file be is 1024. So, okay, we'll come back to that. So right now the texture type is Sprite 2D. The sprite mode is single. We don't have one single image, we have 32 of these. So I'm going to change single to multiple. And then we're going to go to the sprite editor. If I look at the sprite editor and I zoom in, you can see how blurry this is. The reason this is so blurry is because if I jump over to here, this particular image is running 4096 by 128, so 4,000 some pixels across. But Unity, when it gets it, says I'm limiting this to a 1000 or 1024 size. So it's scaling it down and thus creating a blurry image. So I want to change this 1024 to at least the size of what my original image is, so it doesn't scale it down and make it blurry. So I'm going to click on 4096 and press apply. So by doing that, it retains this original size, so there's no more scaling, so it keeps it pixel by pixel. But you can notice that there's a little bit of discoloration and like gray area patches and stuff that isn't quite clean. That's because it's a compressed file format, and that saves megabyte space and megabyte size and space. But I want it to have better quality image, so I'm going to click on True Color and then click Apply again. And so now it went to 2 megabytes, it was 0.5, so it's more file space. But if I zoom in now, you can see it has a lot more clarity on the image. There's more pixels now and more color variety to use. All right, so now that we have the sprites all in here and all that works, I'm going to zoom out and we can see that we have a string or a sprite sheet of 32 of these. Your sprite sheet could be horizontal, it could be vertical, it could be a group or square, it could be all mixed in. However you want to do it, we're going to go over to, let's slide the screen down. We're going to go to Slice, and you can do automatic if you want, and it'll automatically grab all of them, or you can set it to grid. So either option will work. If I say grid, I have to specify the size of it. So if I zoom in, I'm pretty sure I made these at 128 by 128. And so we're going to slice this, and the center, the pivot will be in the center of it. So if I press slice, the pivot's going to be right here, but you can set the center to any other position you want depending on how you want to do that. Now let's zoom out and make sure they still work. So the square on this one, let's slide this over. So the square on the far left one is basically the same size and shape as the square on the far right one, so it looks like it's centered pretty well. So it's basically sliced all of our pieces out. So we're going to press apply, and that should apply all these slices to this one image. So I'm going to close this now, and if we look at the left walking and I click on this, you can see that it took all these different slices and created new images out of these. So we have the character in walking formation. Conversely, this one image itself has one of these slices or frames, I guess. So every one has one of these. So it's a lot more space taking up, whereas this one's a little more organized. You have one sprite containing all of them rather than all these different sprites. So it might be more beneficial to import it as a sprite sheet and keep your file size organized, but maybe not. Not all computers can read high number of file size or large pixel amounts, so depending on if someone has a really old computer, they might not be able to read past a certain point of their pixel size. Alright, so we have all those imported, so now we're going to start creating some animation. So let's jump over to the hierarchy mode, and we're going to go to create, and I'm going to pick on a sprite. So I'm going to make a blank sprite. So I click Sprite, and it looks like because I was selected on standing 2 when I made the sprite, it automatically grabbed that image. If not, had I not been selected on that and I was just on nothing, it would have been a blank little cursor. So either option, I guess a quick demo, if I do Sprite, it'll make an empty little blank cursor. So it has none listed as the sprite. So let's delete that back out. I have this guy right here. If I zoom in, the camera has its own little disappears when you get too close on the guy. Alright, so this is the sprite of left standing number 2. So when you import it, you're automatically going to get a sprite renderer If you uncheck this, it disappears. So without a sprite renderer, your character won't appear on the screen. It needs to be rendered. So that's what this component means right here. And you can expand it or close and expand it. If I want to have a different sprite, I can click the little bullseye thing, and I can pick from all the different sprites that I've imported into my scene at the moment. So if I want to do left standing number 0, the original frame, I can click on that. I can go down here and I can click on the walking frames if I want to do that as well. So I'm going to click just original standing. Alright, so I have the original standing, and I can call this whatever I want. This is going to be my character. Alright, so I have character, and his original sprite is this. This doesn't necessarily matter, but if you were to have this set as none, you're not going to see a sprite when the game, during your editing. Once the game starts, we're going to have the animation jump in. Anyway, so the sprite renderer is showing what we're seeing at the moment. Next up, we want to add some animation to the character. So if I take the character that I've named right here, we pull up the animation window. If you don't see it here, just go up to Window, Animation, and that pulls up this animation window. Right now it's in a tab right here. Alright, so we're going to add animation to this sprite. You can't pull up the window if you're not selected on a sprite in the hierarchy scene. That's not necessarily intuitive to figure out, but if you're not selected on something, your animator panel won't work. If you're trying to add animation to your sprites here, it won't work. You can't add it to the project sprite. You have to add it to the sprite in the scene. So that might be confusing and problematic at times, but yeah, you have to add animation to a sprite in the scene. Alright, so we're going to go over here. You can either click here and create new clip, or you can click on the recorder mode. If you click record, it's going to say make a new animation. We're still in the video demo folder, so I'm going to make a new folder to keep, again, things more organized, and I'm going to call it animation. So I'm going to put the animations in the animation folder, and I'm going to call this one idle. So this is his idle sprite, and press save. So now we're in recorder mode. If I turn off recorder mode, nothing happens. If I go into recorder mode, it's basically asking to edit and adjust some sprites. And we're also in idle mode. So we've created, instead of clicking create new clip, recorder mode popped up that option for us. Alright, so if I jump over to project now, we want idle sprites. So I'll pop out sprites, and I want standing. So I can take standing 1 all the way to the last one, standing 23, and I can drag all of these into the scene. Doesn't matter where I drop it, they'll automatically drop starting at frame 0 up to here. So we've added all these different unique images into here. So if I were to press play now, you can see that the character is breathing rather fast, and that the camera is quite zoomed out. So let's pause that. I can take, let's say, the scene mode, pop it out, and put it in its own separate window. Let's move that up somewhere. There we go. And slide that over. Alright, so I just rearranged the window. If I press play now, it'll stay in the scene mode and won't zoom out as far in the game mode. So I can see that he's breathing, but he's breathing really, really fast. And that's because it's set to a sample of 60 frames per second. So let's pause that. I'm going to put him back at 30 frames per second, which is standard HD TV. So press play. And this should be the speed that I originally animated him breathing at. But you can change it to something else. If you wanted to breathe slower, you would just change the sample speed. So if you wanted to go really slow, you could set, let's say, 10 frames per second, and he'll go 10 frames per second, much slower breathing. So I'm going to go back to 30 because that's what I pre-animated that at. And you can take these things and you can rearrange them and adjust your spacing also, and you can rekey things. So if you have fewer images and you need more gaps and timing between things, you can adjust everything in the animation panel. Alright, so we're good here. We also want a walking sprite, and so for the walking sprite, we don't want to create a whole new sprite. What we need to do is add animation to an existing sprite. So this is our existing character. He has the components here, and every animation that he's going to do, is this is our character now, this one listed character has to have all the sprites added to him. So you can't make more sprites because you're going to have multiple different characters. The sprite actions need to be added to the same object character. So in order to do that, we're going to go create new clip. So you can either do record mode again or just create new clip. We're going to call this one, drop it again, animation folder, call this the walking animation, and press, let's capitalize that since I capitalized the I, walking, save. So now we have a blank timeline, so we can switch between the two, between idle and walking. I'm going to set the 60 down to 30 before I do anything. So we've got that. Next we're going to jump over to project, and I'm going to, again, this takes up a lot of space here, whereas the walking just takes up one, and I don't need to go and select all of these. As long as I grab just the walking, the sprite sheet, it'll automatically take all the pieces inside of it. So drop this in here. Actually, never mind, it didn't. So delete that out. So I guess I do have to expand this out. So I'll take all 31 of these, drag these in place, and it puts all 31 in place. Now I can close out this, and then again it keeps a little more organized. So we have all of these sliced out from the one sprite sheet. So I'm going to go to, actually let's press play and test it. Okay, he's still playing the idle because idle set as default. We haven't changed between the two sprites to play. So theoretically this should play accurately. So we can close out of this. Let's go back to hierarchy mode. Actually, let's close left walking and close sprites in general. Alright, so the character right here, if we click on character, we now have an animator controller. So this animator controller, the controller right here is called character. It got created by default when we started making sprite animations. So if we go over to project, we can see that inside of the animation folder, it automatically created a character controller. If you wanted to make your own extra controllers, there are animator controllers right here. But this was created for us, and if you want to edit it, you can't do it inside the project. Again, you have to edit things inside here, which means if you want a second one, you have to do it all over again or duplicate and stuff, instead of universally doing it once. So over here we have the character. Sprite render is showing our sprite. Animator is showing us how we're going to control this. So if I take the controller and I double click on this, it pulls up the animator tab or window, which again you can pull it up right here if you need that. Orange means it's the default state, so if I were to press play, the idle state, which is this one, is the one playing because it's orange. If I turn that off and click on walking and right click set as default, this becomes the initial state, so now we'll see him walking. Cool. So we press pause again. So I'm going to start with this as the default state, and I want to make a transition where he goes from idle to walking. So if I right click and make transition, I can move this arrow to the walking position. So if I press play now, he'll idle and then go into walking. And he won't stop walking because we need a transition to go back to idle. So I right click on walking, make transition, and drag it back to idle. So now he'll go idle to walk to idle to walk, and he basically plays through all those frames we have in the animation tab. Once he's played through all of these, he'll switch to the next one and play through all the frames again. So great, we've got the sprite transition. We need to be able to control it though when we press left or right on the keyboard, not on its own by the time it finishes the sprite. But we have the initial started. Alright, so we have this character now. Jump back to the character, and our animator is set. Now we need to start adding some components to create collision on the character. So I'm going to add a component, physics 2D, and I want a, let's say, box collider, and I want a circle collider. So what we're going to do now is scale these to create the collision of the character. So the size of the box collider, I'm going to scale narrower, and I'm going to adjust the height a little bit shorter. Then I'm going to adjust the X center to somewhere around the middle of the character, and the height to the top of him, so he has this collision area. And the same thing for the circle. I'm going to adjust the radius till the center is about there, and then adjust the center of it and adjust the radius so it's about the same as the rest of them. So if I used size of, let's say, 0.5, then this one should probably be a radius of 0.25 to keep the math easy. So now I can center this, and it's perfectly matched on those sides, and adjust the Y. So what we're doing here is we're basically creating the round of his feet so he doesn't get caught on like corners. He can roll up over top of objects, and the square part. And you can make it as complex as you want by making these different colliders. You could even do add component. You can even do like polygon collider, which will kind of map out the full amount of them if you wanted to. But I'm going to take that one off and just use the basic shapes because that's a little easier to not get caught on things. Alright, so those are all set now, so I'm going to minimize, or not minimize, but yeah, minimize those. So we have the collision on the character. Next up, we need to start adding some more stuff. So physics 2D, we want a rigid body. Rigid body will add the physics already to the character, gravity and everything for him. So we click on this one, and he has a mass of 1. You can adjust that. He has gravity of 1, and we'll see what happens now. So we press play, and the first thing you notice is he falls. He now has gravity on him, and he'll just drop right off the screen. So we need to put something underneath of him so that he lands on something. So I'm going to go over here, create a new sprite, and I'm going to go to project. Actually, I'm going to go to the sprite right here and click on the ground as the sprite that we want. So double click that, and we have the ground. I can rearrange this wherever I want. In our ground sprite, we need to add collision because, again, he's just going to fall through an image. So it's just an image on the screen. It has no collision. So we need to add component to the new sprite. And physics 2D, again, I could use something like polygon collider, which will give me an accurate outline, but I don't need him walking over every piece of grass. So again, I'm probably not going to use that one. So Control Z, add component. I'm going to do an edge collider. I could do a box, but a box again will just make a big box around it. But edge I can kind of distort. So I'm going to click on edge collider. Now I have a line. This line is now as collision. If I hold the shift key, it starts highlighting where a dot could go. If I let go of shift, it doesn't do that. On Unity 5.0, they have an actual edit button you click. But if I hold shift, I can grab and click, hold shift and click on the line. I can put a dot right there, grab this corner, pull it down, grab that, pull it up, and start defining where I want this collision to be. So now if I let go of shift, you can see that I've kind of defined out the ground plane of where I want to have collision. And you can get a little more complex if you want to. So now there's collision attached to this object. And I'm going to rename the object to ground. So it makes it easier to figure out what's in our scene. If I press play at the moment, the character drops to the ground and it just starts rolling over. So the reason is because the character has physics on him. So that's kind of interesting and funny how that works. But his physics, if I click on the character, he has a rounded bottom. So the rounded feet just roll over when he hits the ground. So we're going to do a fixed angle so he can't roll. So if I press play now, he hits the ground and he doesn't roll anymore. We can't use our arrow keys to move yet because there's no code to them, but you can see he's transitioning between the idle to the walking, to the idle, to the walking, and we need to code that to correspond to the keyboard. But otherwise we have him walking. And if you want him sitting in front of the grass, you would change either him or the ground plane. Let's say I'm going to take him and I'm going to put order layer. I'm going to set that to 5. You can pick different numbers, so it'll make different settings or different degrees of what goes on top of what. So now, because as long as it's at least 1, it'll be in front of the ground, which is by default 0. So now he's sitting in front of the grass, and you can play with different layer orders however you want. So he's sitting in front of the grass, and we'll cancel that. Let's also adjust the camera now. So I'm going to take the camera, and it's really large, really zoomed out. I want to zoom in on him some more. So I'm going to change the camera size. Let's try 2, and you can see now that it zooms in a bit more. And you can also adjust different settings here as well. I think the viewport rectangle, you can adjust the X, how that's going to work. I'm going to set that back to 0, and you can do the Y. Or even the height. So, but again, I'm going to leave that back at default 1. So there's ways you can adjust the camera. Also of note, just because I zoomed in the camera, he's basically going to walk away from the camera and fall off screen. So we want the camera to follow him so he doesn't walk off screen. So to do that, we're going to parent the camera to the character and simply just click and drag the camera onto the character, not between them where there's a line, but on the character. And that parents the camera to the character. So when the character moves, the camera will move with him. And it doesn't happen yet because he's not moving. but if I press play, you can see the camera move for a brief second and fell to the ground with him. Alright, so now we have this all set up, so now we need to start putting some controls on the character. Alright, so we go back to the character, not the camera, but the character. I'm going to expand that close so it's just easier to see. So we have the character, we have a bunch of different things. We have sprite renderer, which is just showing what we're seeing on the screen. Even if I don't have a sprite renderer, when I press play, actually I do need the sprite renderer to show what the animations are. So sprite renderer is on, I can minimize that. The animator is on, is switching between the two of these. Box colliders and physics is on here. So we need to add the coding now. So add component. You could either do scripts, which is typing in all the different things manually and such, or make a new script. But I'm going to use Playmaker. And so if I use Playmaker FSM, which means finite state machine, so it's your coding, whereas GUI, graphical user interface, you're going to be coding the heads up display and stuff and what you're seeing on the screen, text messages and whatever. So FSM, we click on that and it puts a FSM right here. So if I go to the edit mode, it'll pull up the Playmaker window. The Playmaker window, you can dock this if you want to and park it into certain things. I'm going to leave it open. So inside here, we're going to do our graphical coding for the character. So state 1, if I click on this one, is what condition is going to be the first starting. So start, this will be the first condition. So I'm going to call this the movement, M-O-V-E-M-E-N-T. Alright. And we're going to go to some events. So the events are going to be the transitions between what occurs in a state. So I'm going to add event, and I'm going to call this event flip left. So his sprite can flip to the left side. Press enter, and that adds a flip left event. And I'm going to add another one called flip right. And so we have a flip left and a flip right. And I'm also going to make a variable. Variables are going to be numbers that or like a letter that can contain a number, so we don't have to keep typing the number over and over again. So in this variable, I'm going to call this the x. I'll just do x speed. Right, and it's a float variable. Float meaning that it can have decimal places and be different numbers. So we have the x speed variable. So events, variables, and the original state that we're in, and FSM means that there could be multiple different FSMs on the character. But going back to state, we have a movement state. If I click on or right click on movement, I can add a transition, and we're going to call this flip left, and right click add transition, flip right. So these transitions will transition to other states. So if I right click add new state, I can call this one flip left, and I can add a new state and call this flip right. So now I can drag a line between these, so click the left, drag it to flip left, click the right, drag it to flip right. So now when we have the code added, we can say if you press left, go to the left, and if you press right, go to right. Alright, so let's start adding the code. So we go to Action Browser, and this pulls up all the different actions. So whether it's material, logic, lights, level, iTween, input, all these different codes can be added to the character. So what we're going to do is we're going to go for get axis, and that's under the input. So we go over to get axis right here, and this is figuring out which direction it's looking at basically. So I'm going to double click this and it pops it in place. And this is on the movement state. So axis name we have to pick. I'm going to click this little box. Actually it doesn't have that. We're going to type in horizontal, and that should give us a horizontal axis. Over here, I think it's here. Now we're in project settings. Input, yeah, project settings, input, axis. Here you can see the different axes that we have here. So when it says, when we're typing the name of the axis, we have a horizontal axis. Actually has a capital H, you might want to be letter specific on that. And this is the navigation between left and right. So here's the different settings. So if you want to know what the different names to be typing into things are, that's your axes. So we go back to here, and this should probably be a capital H, just to make sure it works. All right, so horizontal is the axis name. Multiplier is going to be how much, basically the distance you're moving. 2.5 should probably work for the character. And we're going to store this as the x speed. And the reason we have x speed listed here is because we have a variable that we named called x speed. Otherwise, it would just be none. And we're going to do this every frame. So every frame, 30 frames per second. So 30 times per second is going to be multiplying the speed of or multiplying his horizontal speed by 2.5 and saving it as the x speed. And figuring out which direction it's going. So positive will be right and negative will be left. So now we're going to go set velocity. So this will actually move the character. So action browser, and if you don't know where the thing is, you can just go over here to typing it in, set velocity, and it kind of narrows it down. So set velocity, but we want set velocity 2D because we're using a 2D game. So add that in there, double click, it pops this in here. And the game object is the owner because we're still selected on the character. Otherwise, you could specify specific game objects. So if you have things within things, let's say an empty containing multiple different character sprites, you might need to specify which sprite you want to change. So x we're going to set as the x speed. So again, we don't have to pick a number because it's taking the original number, which is the variable, which is set to 0, but also what the axis is set to, timesing it by 2.5, and then whatever that is stored at x speed is being reused again here as your velocity. And we want to do that every frame as well. So the next thing, we're going to add another action. This one's going to be get key down. So we want to get key down, and we're going to say scroll through here, click this little down arrow, and we want the right arrow. So take the right arrow, and send event means flip to the right. So send event is right here. Flip right is the flip right, sending it to here. So if this key is pressed, the right arrow, it'll send it to this event, and this event sends it to the flip right state. And we don't need to store any results, so we're fine there. So I can either do this again, double click, or I can even right click, copy selected, and paste it again. So either option will work. I'm going to change this from the right arrow now to the left arrow. Alright, left arrow. And we're going to do send event to the flip left, and we're good there. I'm going to minus, or I'll leave these in case you want to read them again, but I could minus these down to make it a little more conserving space. So now we need to add another action. So I'm going to add a, actually I'll leave this for now. So let's jump over to the next state. So we've told it that if we press the arrow key to the right, we're going to go to flip right. And on the flip right state, we need to set some scales. So this way he flips left and right, otherwise he's going to be walking back and forth the same direction. Or let's try at the moment. I'll move these over and let's take a look at, I guess, scene mode will work. So if I press play, he drops. And if I press left and right, nothing's quite happening yet. So we need to finish coding that, but you can see that it's starting to work. If I press pause and play again, what's happening is we're on the movement state. I press the right arrow and it jumps to right. So now it's stuck on right. It can't go back anywhere. So let's pause that. We need to tell it that when it's done going to here, which we haven't coded yet, but right click, add transition, finished. When it's finished doing what we have here, go back to the movement state to repeat the command. And again here, add transition, finished, and drag that back there. So I have, and you can move these things around. So left will go here. When it does the command here, it goes back to movement and allows it to repeat. So if I were to press play now, you can see the character moves. And this is because he moved one time, one frame, 1/30th of a second he moved, and after that he stopped moving because the command wouldn't leave and go back to allow him to move again another frame. So now he can move. So as long as I'm holding it, it keeps repeating that command because it keeps sending it back and forth in an instant loop 30 times per second. But you can see here he doesn't turn around when he loops. So we need to flip his direction back around. And he isn't responding to the animations yet. So pause that. We're going to go to flip left and add an action. Action browser is already up. For this one, we need to set scale. So set scale. Set scale right there. So double click that. And we want to use this again for the same object because it's the character right here. We want to set the X scale, not to the X speed. So in order to get rid of the variable options, you click this little icon, use variable or not, and it allows you to type things. So I can set an exact number this way. So I want to use X scale. Left means it's going to be turning to the left, so it needs to be -1, so left is negative, so it turns in that direction. And we want to go back to the right. Actually, let's copy this first. So set scale. Let's copy selected actions, paste it here, and this needs to be a positive one because positive is to the right. So if I press play now, let's move this out of the way. He'll move right and he'll turn left. So he turns both different directions depending on how we switch that. Cool. Alright, so that's working. Now we need to worry about controlling the animations. So let's pause that. Let's jump back to the movement. We have all of these set so far. Let's go to the animator panel. So the animator panel, we're going to set transitions between how these are going to work. Let's slide. Let's just close that for now. All right, so we have the parameters, which are going to define how it works. So we're on the character. If I click on the idle state, we have the idle animation playing, and you can change this to whatever, but I only have 2 animations at the moment, and then the walking is playing walking. So if I click on idle, I can either click this down arrow, which will pull up the transition state, or I can click on just this itself and expand out here and I get the same results. So these are the transitions. At the moment what it's saying is, let's pull this down a little more. So the condition is exit time. So exit time basically meaning as soon as the sprite finishes, it'll transition to the next sprite. So I don't want it to transition on exit time. I want it to transition on something else, but I have no other options. So if I go over to parameters and click plus, I can add a parameter, and I'm going to add a float value, which is the decimal place value. And I'm going to call this one, you can call it whatever you want, but I'm going to call this H speed. Alright, so the H speed, the horizontal speed, by default set to 0. You can set that to anything you want. I'm going to go over here and set exit time to H speed and say that if H speed is greater than 0.01, 0.1. So if H speed is greater than 0.1, it'll transition to the walking state. And if I say walking, let's go to transition again. If walking is based on H time, and H time is less than 0.1, so if it's less than 0.1, it'll go back to idle. So if it's idle, which is by default 0, if his idle is greater than 0.1, and right now it's 0, he'll go to walking, but he's not because it's 0, so he stays at idle. But if I go to walking, and his idle, his speed becomes less than 0.1 at any time, that means he's not moving because it's less than 0.1, so it's 0, so he's at idle. So if I press play at the moment, idle is set to this one, so it's not transitioning anymore because he doesn't have any speed. And he has speed now, but we have to tell it that the speed is changing. So press pause, and again, if I set this to, let's say, anything more than 0.1, so I'll just type in 1 and press play. By default, his H speed is 1, so it's going to be walking the entire time. So we need to tell this H speed to change using the code. So I'm going to put this default back to 0 because by default he's going to be at idle. So we go back to the character, click on the character, and on movement we need to go to Action Browser and we need to add some events. We need to set a float. Set animator float. Set animator float. There it is, set animator float. So we double click on that and we have a set animator float. We're going to do this to the owner, which is the game object, using the parameter, and the parameter is what we've defined right here. So we have an H speed we've made, so I can click on this and pick. Actually, you just have to manually type it and make sure you do it letter for letter specific. If you spell it wrong, capital or anything else, it's not going to recognize it. It has to be letter for letter specific. And we can type a value here, but I don't want to type a value. I want to use an existing value. So the existing value is going to be, let's say, the X speed. So the X speed is our existing value, and we want to do this every frame. So if I press play at this at the moment now, slide it over a little further, we can see that the character is walking. He's standing idle. As soon as I press forward, he starts walking, and when I stop, he stops moving. The left, however, he doesn't turn left. But at the moment, you can see that idle is working and working. As soon as I press right on the keyboard, he starts to have velocity. The velocity is turned into our h speed, which is greater than 0 at that point, and he goes to walking. Alright, so we need to fix the problem that he's not moving to the left now. So I'm going to pause this, and the reason he's not moving left is because his x speed is positive when he goes to the right, but when he goes to the left it becomes negative because negative is to the left. But the problem with negative is that if we use x speed as the value for h speed, he'll go negative, which doesn't quite work because it needs to be a positive greater than 0 for the walking to occur. We can't say if it's negative 0 or positive 0 to switch between walking, so all of it needs to be positive. So we need to set an absolute value so it's always positive. So if I action browser, let's say I put set float, actually no, set absolute, no, not set, float absolute. Alright, so we're going to take a float absolute, and we're going to use the x speed, and we're going to make that the absolute value, and we're going to do that every frame as well. So we're going to drag the float above the set animator, so it absolutes it before it reaches this. So if I press play now, it absolutes it. The problem is, and he fell off the world, he no longer can move to the left direction. Even if I'm pressing left on the keyboard, he's moving to the right. Because we have an absolute value, he can't move to that direction. So the problem is we can't use x speed as our variable because he'll keep moving left because it is never negative anymore, it's always positive. So we can't absolute value that. So we need to do something else. We need to go to Action Browser, and we need to add one more thing. So set float value. So set float value, I'm going to drag up before it reaches absolute. So set float value, we need a new variable. We need a float variable. So I'm going to go add a new variable, and I'm going to call this parameter speed. So 0 is fine for default, so parameter speed, go back to state. So set float variable parameter speed, and this is going to signify this parameter speed. And the float variable is the x speed. So we're going to set this float. We're going to set the float of the new one parameter based on the original of the value, which is going to be a number that changes, is your x speed, and we're going to do it every frame. So the parameter is x speed, so x speed can stay its own. So we no longer want to make an absolute of x speed, we want an absolute of parameter speed every frame. So it's basically duplicating the variable, and the variable is only used in the other aspect. So the x speed can still be positive and negative, and then we're going to take that positive or negative and duplicate it into its own separate variable, and that separate variable will become absolute, so the x speed can stay negative. So we no longer want x speed here, we want parameter speed here. So the owner's parameter speed will, based on the x speed, will change the parameter h speed. So that probably sounds really confusing. That's a whole lot of stuff to take in. But if you have these settings right here, and just to review, here's what they all look like if you need to double check and make sure something is accurately typed in the screen or not. I can close that, and the character should move at this point. So if I turn left, he walks left, and if I let go, he stops, and he walks to the right, and he walks left, and he walks right. So we can close out that. You can see that it switches between the two different states when he does that. Close that. You can see it's always idling, but when I press left and right, the speed right here is changing based on the float numbers, and that's signaling that he's walking. In the game mode, the camera screen moves with him now. And let's do one last thing. Let's build up a little bit more of a level. So I'm going to zoom out a little bit. Go to the ground plane, and I can't drag more in there because it's already existing, but I can click on the existing one and go to Edit Duplicate, which is Control-D for the shortcut, and it makes a copy of that. If I go to Move command, I can move, actually there's no, I can move this, but it's not quite giving me the option to, let's close out that. usually there's a move command. I'm not sure why it's not giving me a transform value. Alright, so I guess we need an empty. So we'll go create, game object, create empty. So this empty object, we're going to put the ground, the duplicate ground, inside of the game object. This way, when I click on the game object, I now have the controller, so I can move this a lot easier now. So I'm going to close out that. I'm going to rename this game object to ground. Alright, so the ground object is containing the ground sprite. So that should fix our problem of not having a controller. So now I can take this, I can Control D to duplicate it again, move out another one, and start Control D, building a multiple long landmass level. So if I press play now, actually, let's make this window a little bigger. So this is our main window now. So we'll press play, and the character drops the ground because of gravity, and he'll move and walk and fall, and you can adjust gravity to determine how fast he falls and such. And because he has a rounded bottom now, it makes it easier to transition over top of little bumps like that. And we have a character that walks and stops and walks as long as you are pressing your left and right key. And so that should conclude this tutorial.